Okay.
Take two.
Yes. Got it this time. Who are you? What do you do?
My name is Alyssa, and I work here at Adventures and Missions Guatemala, and I've been on staff for just over 2 years. I primarily work in a town called Parojas, where we work a lot in community development and family development, and also just kids ministry. The main focus is discipleship. I also do a lot of our admin stuff as a base to just help keep us being able to thrive and doing what we do. And another really fun thing that I get to do is help raise up and train Latinos to go to the Middle East as missionaries.
That was one of the big things I was surprised to see when we got here, is just what a wonderful community of raising missionaries to go into the nations you have going on here.
The Middle East is one of the most unreached areas in the entire world, meaning that most of the people in countries like Iraq, Turkey, Jordan, Syria will likely live and die without ever having heard the gospel. So different from us, from where we've heard it and either accepted it or others have rejected it, they have never even heard it, so they don't have a chance to know who Jesus is. We feel like the Lord has given us a prophetic word about 8 years ago that the Lord would raise up Latinos, but specifically Guatemalans, to go to the Middle East as missionaries. This year, we're sending 4 different teams of Guatemalans and also 2 Colombians to the Middle East to be able to share the gospel with people who have never heard it before. It's so cool.
I was quite surprised at the age group of many of these that we got to meet.
Yeah. So it's a lot of 18 to 35-year-olds. We've just found that they're like the most they're the hungriest age. And obviously, if an 80-year-old were to walk into our base and be like, hey, send me to the nations, we're sending them. Like, they're going. As long as they can make it to the other side of the world healthy and alive, we'll send them. But we've seen specifically the younger generation that we would call like millennials and Gen Z, that they have a deep hunger for the things of the Lord. So therefore, if they have a hunger for the things of the Lord, they have a hunger to share the gospel and to surrender their lives to do what it takes that the gospel would be heard. And so it's really beautiful to see these new generations rising up, ready to take the gospel across.
So you were talking about the prophetic word, and you mentioned maybe in the range of 8 years ago. So these kids were 10-ish.
No, literally someone right now who's in the Middle East on a trip. She's one of my favorite people in the world. She's amazing. She's 19. And so when this word would have been received by some of my teammates, she would have been 11.
That's crazy.
Yeah. She probably had never heard of some of these countries in the Middle East, and
right.
now she's there. She's ministering to people.
Yeah. Handpicked, knew by name.
Yep.
So good.
It is.
On the wall, we had a really awesome display, and I want you to tell me more about what that is.
So the display, they're hung up with a ton of cards like this. I don't know if you can see it. We have about, in total, almost 50 cards that are hung up, and each card has a different kid who's in our care point, is what we call them, which is a point of care. But basically our main goal is that through monthly sponsorships of $45 a month, that these kids would have direct access to a nutritious meal, clean water, discipleship. Like I was saying earlier, like it's through our discipleship that we want to serve. So through discipleship, and something specifically that we do is also clean air. A lot of homes that you'll see in Guatemala will have like these either open like stoves where all the smoke is basically coming into the kitchen, and so they're literally inhaling smoke all the time. So we install a lot of stoves, and that will be a direct effect of these care points.
I wanted to hear a little more about Latinos specifically going into the Middle East and how the difference between Latinos versus Latinos is going.
Yeah.
Like
one fun story is I have some friends who are full-time missionaries in the Middle East. When they first got to this country that they're serving in, they were asked 8 different times by the police what they were doing. And they're gringos, they're white, they look like me and Amanda. They stick out significantly from Middle Easterns. Show us your papers, what are you doing here, how long will you be here for, when are you leaving, all of these like super intense questions. 8 different times. And then like a few days later, they met this team of Mexicans who had been living in this country for 3 years and not once had ever been asked by the police what they were doing or anything. And so even like, that's even just a physical appearance thing of how Guatemalans and Middle Easterns, or Latinos and Middle Easterns, they look more similar than obviously us like white-skinned, blue-eyed people. And there's also just a level of surrender that Latinos walk in. You find it a lot more consistently here in these nations than you do in America. And that's not to say Americans can't go to the nations. Obviously, if you have a call in your life to go to the nations, go to the nations. It doesn't matter which one. If the Lord calls you, He's faithful. But there's a strategic plan that the Lord is using to raise up Latinos in these parts of the world. Even with like visa stuff. For example, we cannot go to Iran. We just can't. Guatemalans could go because they don't need a visa to get into the country. And so there's a lot of strategic things that the Lord is doing with the raising up of Latinos.
And you got called to Guatemala. Did you expect to serve in the Middle East?
When I got called to Guatemala, I did not expect to serve the Middle East. Literally, one of my teammates was like, Alyssa, what do you think about sending Latinos to the Middle East? And I was like, that's really cool for you guys. But like, I'm good. I'm good. Like, obviously, I support it 100%. I had no personal buy-in. But then the Lord completely wrecked me one day, actually. We were in a trip, a like domestic mission trip here in Guatemala. And we were, well, actually, the missionary who works up there had just shared a prophetic word that he had received from the Lord 15 years ago about this home that he had bought up in this region, and he had a vision of all these beds and that Guatemalans were coming to his home and they were filling it to specifically be trained as missionaries to go to the Middle East. He had never received a team of Latinos before until we brought this team up there, and he shared this vision and a bit more of the detail that goes into it. And all these Guatemalans were just laid out on their faces in complete surrender to the Lord and like fear of God moment. I'm just like this holy reverence of like, oh my gosh, what is the Lord doing? I'm a part of it. And just like a re-surrender of giving their lives. And in that moment, I'm convinced that if your heart is open to it, you cannot be in a holy moment and not be marked by it. And so in that moment, after he had shared that and seeing all these Guatemalans just on their faces crying their eyes out because of the beauty and holiness and like intelligence of the Lord and what he's doing, completely marked me. And it was there that the Lord convicted me, where I was like, oh, I'm a missionary in Guatemala, like I've already been sent. Where the Lord was like, no, you could still be sent to anywhere in the world. And the Lord really convicted me of that heart posture. And so it's the thing of like, Guatemala is home, but also I get to go to the nations. It's incredibly impactful for them because when they think of missionaries, they think of gringos. For example, when we have these month-long training intensives, we go to these communities and we do ministry. And these Guatemalans are seeing other Guatemalans coming into their communities, wanting to serve them and disciple them, and then talking about going to different regions in the world, and it blows their mind. It's not in their frame of reference. It's not a possibility, like in their brains. And then they meet someone who looks like them, talks like them, comes from the same place as them, and sees them going. Like Delphina, she's from a community up here just up the mountain from our base, and she went on her first mission trip to Honduras. That like broke the like cultural norm of people from her community being sent to the nations. And so we're just seeing Guatemalans inspire other Guatemalans. So as a form of ministry, what we do is we'll go to people's homes and just spend time with them. And Delphina was someone that we did that with years ago. Probably like 6 years ago, we knocked on her door for the first time. She is a very warm person, and she invited us into her home. And most Guatemalans are very, very warm, but she's another level of it. And she welcomed us into her home, and from there, we just started a really beautiful friendship and relationship with her. And then a couple years later, started going a lot more consistently to her home, like weekly or bi-weekly, to intentionally disciple her. And we saw her life change in absolutely beautiful ways. From her not wanting to attend church, from the ways that she was hurt by her past church for very justifiable reasons, to feeling the importance of being in a community of people who love the Lord. Or even from things of walking in a lot of depression and now being like one of the most joyful people we've ever met. And the Lord has absolutely transformed her life. And then when the opportunity came up in March, they went to do ministry with other women in Honduras. And she went just so faithfully. She was nervous about fundraising, but she went about it and she did it. And she went and she came back on fire. And she also asked, like, how can I serve? What can I do? And so we actually have a feeding program, which is a part of our care point, where every Friday we're giving out food and we use her kitchen. She offered her kitchen and she offered her time. And when we said, Delphina, we're going to pay you, she said no. I don't want you guys to pay me. This is my service to my community. As Adventures Guatemala, we're talking about we want to serve, we want to disciple, and we want to send.
So through her, you really got to see each of the
Yes.
points of relationship.
There's literally so many.
I know.
This one day we were doing, again, house visits. There's this specific family. This girl's in that family. I absolutely love the kids. I love the kids so much. It's my favorite kids in the whole entire village. But their mom was not the biggest fan of these weird people who were coming into their village. But I had felt really strongly that the Lord had something very specific for her family and also very specifically for her kids. And so I was like, okay, trying to be the mom, trying to be best friends. And I'm persistent. I'm a super persistent person. And so I would just go consistently to her house. And so I'd just be screaming. I'd be like, buenos dias, which is like, good morning. And I would scream it like over and over and over and over again. And eventually she'd come out and she looked like she was like pissed. She would talk to me, but it's fine, whatever. Maybe she was napping. She, little by little, just gaining more and more trust with her. But she had never invited us into her home. And then one day, I'm actually with my friend's pastor. She's from Argentina. She's lived in Guatemala for like 20 years, but she's not really acquainted with this part of Guatemala. And so there's just a level of cultural things that she's not super acquainted with. We're walking around Parojas, and so because the door is open and there's not an actual door on it, it's perceived that like maybe you could just walk in. And so she just starts kind of walking into their house, and it's not a direct walking into their home, but more like into their yard. It's the furthest I'd ever been into the house, and I'm low-key nervous. I'm like, oh my gosh, Angie's breaking so many cultural norms right now. What do we do? What do we do? What do we do?
You were talking about that being one of the important parts of having people come in and
yes, absolutely
work with you guys.
Absolutely. And so when we have foreigners come in, they get you get a pass on doing dumb things. You get a pass on doing it because they expect you to do those things because you're not from there. Like that actually broke so many barriers for us that day. Because Angie just walks into this home and the three girls are at home and we're just chatting with them and we're like, what's up? And we're like, hey, where's your mom? And their grandma was actually sick, and her grandma lived a few villages down the road. Me and Angie, that day, we actually both got a vision of an older woman sitting over an open fire, and she's breathing in all of the smoke. She just was having a lot of trouble breathing. We go to her house, and one thing, she had just gotten appendix surgery, but also she can't breathe, and we prayed over her, and her grandma actually explained this feeling of a mud coming out of her throat. And so, the Lord healed her both spiritually and physically that day in this home of all these different family members, and being there and ministering and being with these kids. The mom's trust with us dramatically increased to the point where she actually trusted us to take her kids with us, in the car. We went down to the main town down the road with the kids and took them to this coffee shop. So it's just been cool to see the faithfulness of the Lord and the way He's continually progressing in the things that we are very firmly believing that He's speaking over this family, and then not even over this family, over all of the families in this village.
These kids, you know them well.
Mm-hmm.
These aren't just some kids you picked out into the intro. You know each of them, their families. And Junior knows.
Yep. So Junior works. So I work in Parojas, which is the name of one of the care points. Well, one of the towns that the care point is in. And then Junior works in Paramos, and he's super well connected with all the kids that are in his care point and are part of his soccer program where they get to all come and just play soccer. But they actually pastor a church in Paramos. It's literally called restoring the family. And so the heart is to bring restoration to the family. And that's exactly what they do through their church and through the care point, is bringing restoration.
Meet the wonderful couple who are leadership here, the pastors, and they do worship as well. They just bless the community and love on the kids. They also have a football league, 2, I think they said. Yeah, a glimpse into kind of what God's doing. I'll show you the outside because it's beautiful. I love how green everything is. This is just kind of a courtyard section, and the main road's up there through those doors.
They're from here. They're from Guatemala, and they're from Paramos. So born and raised, and they're so faithful to their own people. They've literally given everything. Well, if you would like to support any one of these kids, it's $45 a month, and it goes directly to impact the kids. One of the girls who's on the field right now, who's in the Middle East as a missionary, she was only 11 when we first received this word. And so now we're actually seeing it come to fruition. And now there's people like Amanda here. Not this Amanda, but this Amanda, who's 8 years old. And so in 10 years, she could be on the mission field. And so if you sponsor a kid, you're not only sponsoring them for their physical needs, but also spiritual needs, and creating a space for what the Lord is speaking over them to come to pass. And we also deeply believe in the Lord's strategy to break generational poverty. And we believe through these sponsorships is one of the Lord's strategy that we will see an end to generational poverty, specifically in this region of Guatemala that we're serving in.
Thank you so much for giving me your time and for sharing and for all that you do just in general. I got a chance to meet some of these kids and serve just to see just a tiny glimpse, it's just a short time I've been here, of what God is doing.
Entonces, pues, a los latinos hemos platicado tanto de cómo es el llamado de Dios que ustedes vayan a las naciones. Entonces, solo quiero animarles, si ustedes sienten un llamado a ir a las naciones, que vayan. Y también nosotros tenemos un programa para enseñarles y todo, se llama Missionary. Entonces, si quieres ser parte de eso, puedes seguirnos ahí en Instagram, se llama Adventures Guatemala en inglés, o también tenemos un Instagram, se llama Missionary Inversiones. Entonces, quiero animarles que si sientes este llamado, que puedes vender tu corazón al Señor y que ustedes pueden ver lo que el Señor va a hacer con un corazón vendido a Él. Es tan hermosa y eso es tu llamado y estamos aquí para ustedes, para mandarles, para edificarles y